What do you think I was trying to do? I keep saying that the atmosphere was so charged, all it required was just one man, half a dozen people to strike the match and throw it into the charged air, the gassed up air, you know? And he would do his own job. You could go to sleep. 15 May, finally, that's what one was going to do. But I said, too many innocent people.
So what went wrong on May 15th?
Nothing went wrong. Nothing went wrong. All I did was to ask the boys to take a rest for 2-3 hours, because we're ready by midnight. And if we had started, it was so deep. You know, when people are feeling angry to that extent, darkness is the favorite time. So, not light. And if we had started in the darkness of midnight, oh, Chief, it wouldn't have been good at all. So, it was too early. So I had to tell them, take a rest. And I also lay on the ground in the bush. And we didn't start until close to 3 o'clock. So that by the time we arrested the armored cars and did this and did that and dislocated this, because I decided that I'm not going to go through with the ignition, because, like I said, people would die. It was not necessary. We didn't have to do it. So I decided maybe we will rather capture some of the senior officers and senior elements, yes, and demand a Durbar, with the senior officers. And
then you got arrested.
Yeah, unfortunately, there again, as daylight was hitting us, a couple of them started to escape. You see what I mean? Because this is not what anybody banked on. And they didn't know that I was going to do what I was doing. And my reason for it, you know? I just didn't want to see blood spilled. It was not necessary. So I was more prepared, you know, to face arrest, to lose, than to make others lose and lose their lives. Yeah, that is what went wrong with 15 May. And yet, the very thing I was doing to prevent the explosion is exactly what happened June 4th. Fortunately, my voice had been heard, so I was able to, you know, help to cool them.
At Burma Hall on the 28th of May, 1979, all eyes were on the entrance when the court was ordered to rise. There they came, Justice Wairedu, Judge Advocate, followed closely by the General Court Martial, led by Colonel Joseph Enningful. The accused persons were also marched in, led by the first accused, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. Second accused, leading aircraftman, John Newton Gatsiko. Third accused, leading aircraftman Sylvanus Tamaklo. Fourth accused, Captain David Baba. Fifth accused, leading aircraftman Albert Kwasi Gabafa. Sixth accused, leading aircraftman Daniel Zibalosu. Seventh accused, Corporal Iawi Akubald. Practically for hundreds of civilians there, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings was a new face. When he was identified as the first accused, the principal architect of the mutiny, curiosity ran high. The first accused had for a long time felt disillusioned about the injustices in our society, more particularly under the Achampong regime, and so when in July 1978 the SMC was reconstituted with the removal of Mr. Achampong as head of state, Jerry John Rawlings thought things were going to improve. When he realized that there were no improvements in the general condition of life, he was struck with dismay and lamented over what he termed the tarnished image of the armed forces. He regretted that at a time when the military government is due to hand over to a civil government, the military government had done practically nothing to improve the image of the armed forces. In his original statement to investigators, Jerry John Rawlings had written that when the then Colonel Achampong stepped in 1972 to stop the rape of the wealth of the nation, he cried with joy and satisfaction. Achampong was introducing some dynamism into government, based on honesty and integrity. But as soon as Colonel Aquanorte, a member of the government, was spared for hoarding large quantities of sugar, he began to lose hope. The abuse of wealth and human dignity began, he wrote. This led him to summon a handful of Air Force personnel including the other accused persons together with Corporal Daniel Hamadou, Mr. Noy Keener and Ali Anumyemo, and held secret meetings in a plantain grove behind the Air Force station as to how best to tackle the situation.
After closing from duty in the afternoon of May 14, 1979, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings picked up an ex-airman Mr. Ninoy Keener in his car and drove to the recce stable where Rawlings signed for a hammer and a pair of pincers. From there, he drove through the station to find out who the duty crew were and whether the published officer was the one on duty. On arrival, he realized that the duty officer was rather Flight Lieutenant Atimo and not W. Osaki as published. From there, he went to the mess to find out from the adjutant if Flight Lieutenant Atimo was on duty as punishment, and this was confirmed.
Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings then drove his car home and gave Mr. Quainer some lunch, then packed his overall, boots, pistol and tools into a kit bag. He left with Mr. Quainer to the latter's house where Mr. Quainer also collected his overall and took some money with him. They then went through the bush and arrived at the plantain grove at about 8 p.m. He apologized to his colleagues who had assembled there, namely Gatsiko, Sylvanus, Nick, Daniel, and Gbafa, for arriving an hour late than the scheduled time, and briefed them about the form the operation was going to take, that is, assuming control over the station after arming themselves, taking over armored vehicles and then proceeding to recce headquarters where the rest of the armored cars were stationed.
He then asked Gatsiko to follow him through the bush to the Air Force Station ammunition dump where Rawlings broke the padlocks, went inside and collected a box of 9 ammunition rounds and a tin of 7.62 rounds of ammunition. At this stage, Albert Kwasi Gbafa, fifth accused person, joined them. Rawlings then shut the door and returned to their rendezvous. Thereafter Rawlings sent for Corporal Hamadou, who was on duty at the guardroom. Corporal Hamadou answered the call and came with Corporal David Baba, the fourth accused, with the information that the other person on duty was wide awake, and so Rawlings suggested that they should wait until he fell asleep. It was then about 10:30 p.m. Rawlings and his group waited until 2 a.m. when Corporal Hamadou collected the keys to the armory from the sleeping guard and brought them to Rawlings. Rawlings asked Gbafa, the fifth accused person, to accompany him to the armory where they opened the doors and collected about 10 G3 rifles, 10 SMGs, submachine guns, and magazines, and returned to their hideout in the bush. The first accused, Rawlings then shared the weapons and ammunition among his men, went and took over the duty station by arresting the duty officer Flight Lieutenant Atimo and the duty crewmen. He was accompanied by the third accused, leading aircraftman Sylvanus Tamaklo. Rawlings ordered the duty officer to telephone for the duty vehicle, and on arrival of the vehicle, Rawlings ordered the driver to get down and asked the sixth accused, Daniel Zibalosu, to take control of the wheel. Rawlings ordered the duty officer into the front seat and he jumped into the back seat with Gatsiko, Nick, and Keener. They started moving towards the recce stable. On the way through the gate, Rawlings dropped Noy Keener and another airman to take over the gate guards, and took along with him the gate guard commander. From there, Rawlings went with his men to the recce stable where he arrested 3 soldiers who were said to be sleeping. He instructed one of them to telephone the duty officer, by name Warrant Officer Tuasare, and inform him to come to the aid of a woman who was being molested and was bleeding. By this ruse he was able to robe in Asare, and with him they all drove to the Air Force Station. There, Rawlings dropped 3 men he had taken from recce, and proceeded with Warrant Officer Tuasare to the VIP lounge at the airport, where he instructed Asare to order the drivers of the armored car to fall in. As Warrant Officer Tuasare appeared hesitant, Rawlings took over, and ordered the men to charge the armor cars, that is to fill the guns mounted on the vehicles with ammunition. The drivers said the armored cars were ready and charged. At this point, it was getting to daybreak. Rawlings ordered the drivers into their seat and the gunners into theirs, while Newton Gatsiko, the second accused, and another airman took over one of the armored cars, and Corporal David Baba, the fourth accused, and Rawlings mounted the other together with the duty officer. From there they drove to the Air Force Station where Rawlings collected the rest of the recce soldiers and proceeded to the recce headquarters. They parked in front of the gate leading to the armored cars garage, near the square. Here, Rawlings sent one of the recce soldiers to blow the alarm of the unit, but when he was told that it was not serviceable, Rawlings sent Gatsiko and his armored vehicle to the Air Force Station to blow the alarm there, and bring the siren down with him, which Gatsiko did. Gatsiko returned and informed Rawlings that Gatsiko had ordered the arrest of Group Captain Pumpuni, Wing Commander Amirip, and Squadron Leader Didi. Rawlings then instructed one of the soldiers to blow the siren, and in the process of the siren being blown, the recce regiment commanding officer, Major Abubakar Sulemana, arrived in his car. He was confronted by Rawlings and his men. When Major Sulemana queried the driver of one of the armored cars as to why he was not wearing his beret while driving the Mawag, Rawlings shouted, "You are not in command here." "I am. You are under arrest."
Major Sulemana sensed there was something wrong, got out of his car, and was chased by the Mawag until he reached the junction to his house. The Major shouted at the driver of the Mawag to drive the vehicle back to the square, but Rawlings retorted, saying, "Sir, I am serious, and if you don't stop I will fire at you." Major Sulemana did not stop, and Rawlings fired the SMG submachine gun which he was holding. Major Sulemana rushed to the recce magazine where soldiers were armed with guns and ammunition, and supplied them with armored cars to quell the operation.
During the course of the dialogue, Rawlings used some of the officers arrested as hostages. After a while, 3 Mawags arrived through the main gate and surrounded the officer group. There was shooting, and in the process an airman died while another got wounded. Major Sulemana later arrived at the scene and succeeded in getting Rawlings to disarm his men. Rawlings put down his gun and was eventually arrested. A draft speech which is suspected was intended to be read by Rawlings during the exercise, was collected from his person when he was searched. Details of his speech will be made known during the trial. A stage was then set for a dialogue with Rawlings. During the course of the dialogue, Rawlings used some of the officers arrested as hostages. After a while, 3 Mawags arrived through the main gate and surrounded the officer group. There was shooting, and in the process an airman died while another got wounded. Major Sulemana later arrived at the scene and succeeded in getting Rawlings to disarm his men. Rawlings put down his gun and was eventually arrested. A draft speech which is suspected was intended to be read by Rawlings during the exercise, was collected from his person when he was searched. Details of his speech will be made known during the trial.